Let me tell you a story. A story that still haunts me to this day. If you think you're brave enough, stick around. But I'll warn you, this isn't your typical scary tale. This is about something darker, something ancient, something that makes the bravest of sailors freeze in terror. It all began in the summer of 2009. I had just been hired as a marine researcher for a private company. The pay was good, and the job seemed straightforward enough, documenting and studying marine life around a cluster of islands off the coast of Norway. Our ship, the Horizon, was an old, rusted vessel, the kind that had seen better days, but it was built to withstand the rough northern seas. My excitement for the adventure was overwhelming, but it was short-lived, replaced by an unease I couldn't shake. The first few days were smooth. We documented everything from small fish to massive whales. My crew was small, 5 of us in total. There was John, the no-nonsense captain, Mike, the ship's engineer, Sarah, a marine biologist with a passion for adventure, and Lisa, a strikingly beautiful researcher with sharp eyes and a mysterious aura about her. She wasn't just the typical attractive girl on the boat. There was something about Lisa that drew you in, like the calm before a storm. But I didn't understand why at first. On the 4th night, everything changed. We were sailing through a patch of open water when Lisa suddenly started acting strange. She stood on the deck, staring out into the dark, endless ocean, her hair whipping around in the cold wind. I approached her, asking if she was okay. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on something far out in the water, but there was nothing there. Just black waves and an eerie silence. Her expression, it was one of longing, almost like she was listening to something only she could hear. Before I could ask her again, the ship's alarms went off. Mike shouted from the engine room that something was wrong with the systems. We were losing power. Captain John rushed to the bridge, barking orders. But what happened next? It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The waves around the ship started to rise, higher and higher, crashing violently against the hull. Out of nowhere, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, enveloping us completely. Visibility was zero. The only sound was the crashing of the water and the groaning of the old ship as it fought to stay afloat. Then, a sound, soft at first but unmistakable, a woman's voice. It wasn't coming from any of the crew. It was coming from out there, in the water. Lisa's eyes widened. She smiled, a smile I'll never forget. She leaned in closer to the edge of the ship, as if the voice was calling her. I grabbed her arm, pulled her back, demanding to know what was going on. She turned to me, her voice low, almost hypnotic. "They're here." "Who? Who's here?" I asked, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. But she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed out to the water. And that's when I saw it. A shadow beneath the surface, circling the ship like a predator. My heart pounded in my chest. The shape in the water grew clearer. A massive figure with scales shimmering just beneath the surface. And then out of nowhere, it rose. A woman, or what looked like a woman, emerged from the waves. Her skin was pale, her hair long and dark, dripping with seawater. But her eyes, they were wrong. They were glowing, like burning embers. She sang softly, a melody so beautiful, so entrancing, it made my mind feel foggy, like I was in a trance. I could see the same look in the eyes of my crew. Lisa stepped forward again, almost in a daze, but this time I wasn't fast enough to stop her. She reached the edge of the ship and dove into the water without hesitation, disappearing beneath the surface with a splash. "Lisa, no!" I shouted. But it was too late. She was gone. Before I could react, more figures began emerging from the water, their haunting melodies filling the air. We were surrounded, These weren't just any creatures. They were sirens, the ancient sea monsters of legend, luring sailors to their deaths with their irresistible voices. But these weren't the beautiful mermaids from children's stories. These were creatures born from nightmares. Their faces, once alluring, twisted into grotesque forms the closer they got to the ship. The crew began panicking. Mike rushed to fix the engines, while John grabbed a flare gun, shouting at us to get inside. But it was useless. One by one, the sirens started to climb aboard the ship, their sharp claws digging into the rusted metal. Their voices echoed in my head, pulling me towards the edge of the ship, just like they had done with Lisa. I fought against it with everything I had, but the temptation, it was overpowering. And then, silence. The fog thickened. The sirens stopped singing. For a brief moment, everything was still. But that's when we saw her, the leader of the sirens, standing on a rock just beyond the ship. Her beauty was unimaginable, far more alluring than the others. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She didn't speak, but her gaze told me everything I needed to know. We were never meant to leave these waters. Before I could move, the ship lurched violently, throwing us all to the deck. Water began flooding the engine room. We were sinking. I'll stop here for now. But if you were in my shoes, would you have jumped into the water after Lisa? Or would you have tried to fight the sirens? Let me know what you would have done in the comments. And if you think you're brave enough, hit that like button and keep watching. Because trust me, things only get worse from here. The ship groaned under the pressure as water rushed into the lower decks, and the horrifying realization hit me. We were sinking. Mike scrambled to fix the engines, his hands shaking as he tried to maintain focus. But deep down, we all knew this ship was not making it through the night. Captain John, gripping his flare gun with white-knuckled intensity, yelled at us to abandon ship. Get to the lifeboats, now. But where would we go? The sea was alive with those creatures. Their haunting voices filled the air, pulling at our minds, tempting us to give in. And Lisa, she was gone, swallowed by the dark abyss. I ran towards the lifeboats, Sarah at my side, her face pale with fear. "We can't just leave Lisa," she screamed, her eyes wide with panic. But there was no reasoning with her. I grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Sarah, she's gone. You saw it. We can't go after her or we'll end up like her." Tears streamed down her face, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As we reached the side of the ship, I glanced over my shoulder. The sirens were getting closer, their twisted forms scaling the hull like spiders. One of them locked eyes with me, her lips curling into a sickening smile, sharp teeth glistening in the pale moonlight. The temptation to listen, to let go, was growing stronger by the second. We reached the lifeboats, and Captain John was already lowering one into the water. "Move it! We don't have much time," he barked. Mike had joined us, panting heavily, his face drenched in sweat. Just as we were about to climb in, a piercing scream echoed across the deck. It was Lisa. I froze. The scream came from the water. How was she still alive? Was it a trick? My heart raced as I looked over the edge of the ship. In the distance, through the thick fog, I saw her. Lisa, clinging to a piece of driftwood, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to go back for her," Sarah cried. But I hesitated. Something wasn't right. How had she survived in those waters with the sirens? How had she made it this far without drowning? Captain John cursed under his breath. "We're not going back. That's not her anymore." But Sarah didn't listen. She broke free from my grip and ran towards the edge, ready to dive in after Lisa. Just as she was about to leap, I grabbed her arm again. "Wait, look closer." We stared at Lisa, floating in the distance, her body barely visible through the mist. Then, it happened. Slowly, a figure began to rise from the water behind her. It was one of the sirens, its long dark hair blending with the waves. Its bony hands gripped Lisa's shoulders, and just like that, she was pulled under, her screams silenced in an instant. The sirens had been using her as bait. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Mike, shaking, whispered, "We're not gonna make it out of here, are we?" The truth was, I didn't know, but I wasn't ready to give up. "Get in the boat," I ordered. "Now." We lowered the lifeboat into the water, and just as we hit the surface, the sirens swarmed. Their haunting songs filled the air again, and this time it was louder, more intense, like they knew we were slipping away. The boat rocked violently as their claws scraped against the sides, their faces twisting into hideous, inhuman shapes. Mike started paddling furiously, but the sirens were relentless. One of them grabbed the edge of the boat, pulling herself up. Her mouth opened wide, and the melody that came out wasn't a song anymore. It was a scream. A deafening, blood-curdling scream that made my vision blur and my head pound. I could feel myself losing control, the urge to jump into the water almost overwhelming. That's when Captain John fired the flare gun. The red light shot into the air, illuminating the sea in a fiery glow. For a moment, the sirens stopped, their heads snapping toward the sky, distracted by the bright light. It was our only chance. "Row! Now!" John shouted. With every ounce of strength, we paddled away from the sinking ship, away from the horrors in the water. But even as we distanced ourselves, I knew we weren't safe. The sirens didn't just want our ship, they wanted us. We drifted for what felt like hours. The fog was thick, and we couldn't see land. All we had was the faint hope that we were heading in the right direction. But the silence was unsettling. No one spoke. We were too afraid to break the eerie quiet. Even the sirens had gone silent. For now. Just when I thought we might have escaped, the water around the boat began to ripple. My heart sank. The sirens were still following us. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I listened closely. At first I didn't hear anything, but then it came. A soft humming, growing louder with each passing second. The siren's song. They were getting closer again. "Don't listen," I shouted. "Whatever you do, don't listen." But it was too late. The melody was intoxicating, seeping into us. But before we could move, the water erupted. A shape, a dark, twisted form, emerged from the sea, towering over us. Its long, sinewy arms reached for the boat, its face hidden behind a curtain of wet, matted hair. It wasn't like the other sirens. This one was different. Its presence was suffocating, a living nightmare pulled from the depths of the ocean. Sarah screamed again, backing away from the edge as the creature's hand gripped the side of the boat, the wood creaking under its strength. Captain John fired the flare gun, the red light flashing through the mist, but the creature didn't flinch. It let out a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl, before slowly pulling itself closer to the boat. "We need to go now," I yelled, grabbing the oars and rowing as hard as I could. Sarah joined in, her face pale with terror, her hands trembling as she tried to paddle. But no matter how hard we rowed, it was no use. The boat wasn't moving. The creature's grip tightened, pulling us back toward the dark water. Captain John fired another flare, but the creature reached for him, its long fingers curling around his ankle. "Get it off me," John shouted, kicking at the hand. But the creature's grip was iron. It yanked him violently, and in one swift motion, he was pulled overboard. His scream echoed through the mist as the creature dragged him under, the water swallowing him whole. "John!" I screamed, but it was too late. He was gone, just like the others. We were alone. Sarah and I sat there, frozen in shock, the boat rocking gently on the waves. The fog closed in around us, thicker than before, like a living entity, suffocating us in its cold, damp embrace. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. We were losing people, one by one. How do we stop this? Sarah whispered, her voice cracking with fear. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we had to keep moving. We couldn't stay here, not with those things out there, not with the sirens watching us, waiting for their moment to strike again. I grabbed the oars, my hands shaking. We have to keep rowing. We can't give up. Sarah nodded weakly, her eyes filled with tears, but she picked up the oars and started paddling again. We moved slowly through the fog, the eerie silence pressing down on us, but at least we were moving. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound, every ripple in the water made me jump. I could feel the sirens' presence all around us, their eyes watching us from the depths, their song whispering at the edge of my mind, tempting me to give in. Then, out of the mist, I saw something, a dark shape looming ahead. It was huge, its outline barely visible through the fog. "Look," I whispered, pointing at it. "There's something up ahead." Sarah squinted, her face tightening with fear. "What is that?" As we got closer, the shape became clearer. It was a ship, a massive, old ship, covered in barnacles and seaweed, its sails tattered and torn, flapping lifelessly in the wind. "Is it real?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "But it's our only chance." We paddled closer, and as we approached, I could see the name of the ship written on its side in faded, peeling letters. The Cassandra. My blood ran cold. I had heard of this ship before. It was a legend, a ghost story told by sailors for generations. The Cassandra had disappeared over 100 years ago, lost in a storm, its crew never to be seen again. And now, here it was, floating silently in the fog, waiting for us. Would you step aboard a ghost ship if it was your only way out? Let me know in the comments. What would you do? Sarah and I sat in the boat, staring up at the Cassandra, the ghostly ship towering over us like a specter from another time. My mind was racing. Every instinct screamed for me to turn around and row the other way, but there was nowhere else to go. The sirens were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. We needed to take a chance. "We have to board," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "It might be our only way out." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious. That ship is a nightmare waiting to happen. We'd be walking into a trap." "I know," I swallowed hard. "But we can't just sit here and wait for them to come for us again. We don't have a choice." For a moment, Sarah just stared at me, her breath shallow and uneven. Finally, she nodded, though every movement was filled with dread. "Okay, but if we go up there and something happens..." She trailed off, not finishing the sentence, as if the very thought was too much to bear. With great effort, we rowed the small boat closer to the side of the massive vessel. As we neared, I noticed a rope ladder hanging from the side, swaying gently in the breeze. It looked old, the ropes frayed and worn, but it was our only way up. I reached out, gripping the ladder tightly, and started climbing. The wood creaked beneath my weight, but it held. Sarah followed close behind, her hands trembling as she ascended. The climb felt like an eternity, but eventually, we made it to the deck. The air on the Cassandra was cold, colder than it should have been, given the sea air. The deck was slick with moisture, the wood old and rotting in places, and there was an eerie silence that hung over everything. No sound of footsteps, no signs of life. Just the oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow up all other noise. "This doesn't feel right," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to ward off the chill. I couldn't argue with her. Everything about the ship felt wrong. But we were here now, and turning back didn't seem like an option. We needed answers. As we walked across the deck, my eyes caught something at the far end. There was a door, partially ajar, leading below deck. The darkness beyond it seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive. "Do you think we should?" I asked, pointing toward the door. Sarah shook her head quickly. "Absolutely not. We stay on the deck. We don't go down there." But before we could make any decisions, the door creaked open wider on its own, a low groaning sound filling the air. Sarah gasped, grabbing my arm tightly. "It's them. They know we're here." I shook my head, trying to stay rational. It could just be the wind. This ship has been abandoned for a long time. But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. Suddenly, from the darkness below, there was a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then it grew louder, swirling around us like a breeze that carried voices. "Come." The voice was soft, gentle, almost hypnotic. It was calling to us. Sarah clamped her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with terror. "Don't listen to it. It's the sirens." But I couldn't help it. Something about the voice was pulling me in, drawing me towards the open door. My feet moved on their own, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the darkness below deck. "No! Stop!" Sarah shouted, grabbing me by the arm and yanking me back. Her sudden force broke the spell, and I stumbled, shaking my head to clear the fog from my mind. The voice faded, replaced by the eerie silence once again. But now, I was certain, we weren't alone on this ship. "We have to find out what's down there," I said, my voice unsteady. "If we don't, we're just sitting ducks." Sarah looked at me like I had lost my mind, but I could see the same fear in her eyes that I felt in my own heart. She knew we couldn't ignore it. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Okay, but we stay together." I agreed, and together we made our way toward the open door. The darkness inside was thick, almost tangible, as if it were alive and waiting for us. I hesitated at the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. Would you step into the unknown, even knowing it might be your doom? Let me know in the comments if you'd dare to explore a haunted ship like the Cassandra. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The wooden stairs creaked under our weight as we descended, the air growing colder with each step. The darkness seemed to close in around us, thick and suffocating, but there was no turning back now. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a narrow corridor, the walls covered in mold and dripping with condensation. The faint sound of water sloshing echoed through. We moved slowly, our footsteps muffled by the oppressive atmosphere. As we walked, I noticed something strange. The walls were covered in old, faded drawings. They looked like carvings, scratched into the wood by hand. The images were crude, almost childlike, but they depicted something disturbing. Figures, human figures, being dragged into the sea by dark, monstrous shapes. Are these drawings of the sirens?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my stomach turning. Whoever had made these drawings had seen something terrible. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the corridor, and we both froze. It came from behind one of the doors lining the hallway, a heavy metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded again, my pulse racing. Something, or someone, was behind that door. We approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. I reached out, my hand trembling, and gripped the cold, rusted handle. With a deep breath, I pulled the door open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. At first it seemed empty, just an old storage space, filled with rotting crates and damp ropes. But then in the far corner, I saw it. A figure. A girl. She was sitting there, huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her long dark hair covering her face. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. The girl didn't move. She just sat there, completely still, as if she hadn't heard me. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here, now." But I couldn't move. Something about the girl. It felt familiar. I took a step closer. "Are you okay?" Slowly, the girl lifted her head, and as she did, my blood turned to ice. Her eyes were black, completely black, like two endless voids staring into my soul. And then she smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Welcome aboard," she whispered. "What would you do if you found a girl like this on a ghost ship? Would you stay or run? Let me know in the comments below." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, and the lights flickered out. We were trapped. The lights had gone out, leaving us in absolute darkness. The door behind us was locked tight, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate breathing of the girl in the corner. I felt Sarah's hand clutch my arm tightly, her fingers trembling. "What now?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know how to respond. The girl, this impossible, eerie girl, was staring right at us, her black eyes glimmering faintly in the dark like twin pits of night. My breath hitched, my mind racing for an escape, for anything to get us out of this nightmare. And then out of nowhere, she began to laugh, low at first, a soft giggle that bubbled up from her throat. But then it grew louder and louder, echoing in the small room, until it was a full maniacal cackle that sent cold shivers racing up my spine. Sarah tugged at my arm. "We have to move. We can't just stand here." The girl stopped laughing abruptly, her head tilting to the side as if she had heard something. Her smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure malice. Slowly she began to rise to her feet, her movements unnatural, like a puppet being pulled up by invisible strings. I backed up against the door, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Stay back!" I yelled, trying to sound brave. But my voice cracked in fear. The girl ignored my warning. She stepped forward, one deliberate step at a time, her head tilted, her eyes never leaving mine. "Who are you?" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "What do you want from us?" The girl paused for a moment, her eerie smile returning. "You are just like them," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with venom. "They came here too, curious, seeking answers, and now they are part of the sea." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic. Who? Who are you talking about?" "The others. The ones who came before you. They thought they could escape. But the sea never lets anyone go." Sarah and I exchanged terrified glances. Whatever this girl was, whoever she had been, there was no reasoning with her. We needed to find a way out, fast. Just as I turned to try the door again, the room began to shift. The walls creaked and groaned, as if the ship itself were alive, twisting around us. The floor tilted slightly, throwing us off balance. I grabbed Sarah's hand as we stumbled, but then the girl's voice cut through the chaos once again. "The Cassandra always gets what she wants," she whispered, her black eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. The air grew even colder, and thick, dark liquid oozed from the wooden panels, dripping down in slow, deliberate streams. The smell was overpowering, like salt and decay. I gagged, trying to hold back the bile rising in my throat. But Sarah wasn't as lucky. She doubled over, retching violently as the stench filled the room. And then, without warning, the girl lunged. Her movement was so fast, I barely had time to react. One moment she was standing still, and the next she was inches from my face, her hand reaching out toward me with inhuman speed. I barely managed to dodge to the side, dragging Sarah with me as we tumbled to the floor. "Run!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet and pulling Sarah toward the door. But the door wouldn't budge. I pounded on it with all my strength, but it was as if it had been welded shut. "Let us out!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with fear. The girl's laughter echoed around us once more, filling the room with its haunting melody. "There's no escape," she whispered. "Not for you. Not for anyone." In the dim light, I saw her standing there, her form barely visible through the darkness, her eyes glowing faintly like two cold embers. Her smile